Hello, all. It is Thursday, and I am back from our nation's capital, Ottawa. And as promised on the Twitter, I am going to talk about the story sort of behind this article that is mostly about me. You'll notice there is a picture of me, and it's always awesome having your picture taken by the media on Passover. Because Passover food does bloat you, so of course it gave trolls the opportunity to call me fat, which they love to do. But that's not the story that I'm here to tell you today. This is part of it, right? Because I think the reason I'm talking about this is I think that a lot of people don't realize how a piece of news, a story in the news, becomes a thing, becomes the finished product. Because I think it's important that people be able to parse what is said in the media. And this is an interesting article because I wouldn't say it's inaccurate, but it's interesting to me what pieces of what I was saying got picked up by the mainstream press. I think partially due to a lack of understanding or a lesser understanding of video games and video game culture. And for people who are wondering, I didn't know going down there that I was going to be talking to the press. It all happened very, very fast. And I ended up on the CBC website as well as CBC radio. We'll save the radio story for after I go through the article because it's a hilarious story in retrospect, but it is certainly more of a disconnect than I think this article was. The first paragraph off the top: with video game designers and developers from around the world in Ottawa this week for a conference, one critic and analyst wants them to take a deeper look at sexism in video games to make them more inclusive. It's to make them more inclusive that is sort of the part that it's like, no, that wasn't the intent of the talk. The intent of the talk is for developers who are interested and or concerned about sexism in games. Then I was offering them tools to, be sure they're sending the intended messages. But I can see how someone from the outside would have this approach, without malice. But that's one of those things is it makes it sound like I want to change games. And that wasn't the thrust of the talk. Now, to someone on the outside, this is not important because they don't necessarily understand the sensitivities involving, surrounding video games and discussions of video games nowadays. So that's just the beginning of an article that for some people read as more harsh than my actual message is. But moving on, while women in video games can be portrayed as sexualized, secondary, or passive characters, Liana believes that sexism is often accidental. Okay, that sexualized, secondary, or passive characters, that didn't come from me. That was the perspective of the article. So people, just so you know, I did not go through how women are sexualized, secondary, or passive characters. I didn't even touch on wardrobe except that thing I did about the He-Man and She-Ra test, which is comparative. It has nothing to do with whether women are sexualized or not. It's, are they more sexualized than the male characters, right? But she shared her analysis in a seminar called Accidental Sexism from Game Design at the 5th Annual Ottawa International Games Conference. All right, fine. Yes, that is true. And this is, to an extent, the CBC trying to cover games and trying to find a in that is relevant to the CBC audience. Because you have to understand, the CBC audience is old. It's not a young crowd, and it is not a particularly tech-savvy crowd. So in order to cover this event, they needed to find something that they think their users, the people that come to this website would be interested in. So I guess they zeroed in on my talk as something relevant to their interests. Now this next quote, pretty much all the quotes in this article are accurate. They are things I said. It's the framing around them that puts them in a different perspective, and that's what I find interesting. So the first quote is, "It's not bad intent. So most people who make these mistakes aren't bad people. They aren't sexist people. They just made a faulty assumption or went for a cheap cliche. It's usually trying to get from point A to point B too fast and missing something. And I'm very glad they use that, because the thing I'm happy about with this article is it does get the message out that, you know, game developers, whatever you think about their products, are not bad people. They're not trying to ruin people's lives. Gamers aren't sexist in and of themselves. So I'm very glad that they use that quote. The next paragraph, I wish they had used the word sometimes. As a result, women characters end up in stereotypically sexist situations. I would prefer that read, as a result, women characters sometimes end up in stereotypically sexist situations. That one word would have made me much more comfortable with this. In a game's narrative is actually a mistake. I said from the beginning of the talk that I am not dealing with narrative. I am dealing with gameplay systems. And of course, gameplay and narrative are linked, but that's not an intent to twist my words. That's just somebody from the CBC not understanding what I was saying in this talk. And this is why I don't put this talk online. I know a lot of people have asked, but guys, I do have some talks that people pay me to go and deliver to developers and to business people and things like that. And the reason I don't put them online is they're pretty deep dives. They're not designed for the general population. They are more elaborate discussions of gameplay systems designed for people who make games. And so my concern with this talk has always been that a layperson coming in who is not a student of game design, who is not a professional game developer, is going to get lost in the weeds, so to speak. And I think that's exactly what happened here, because I specifically said, no, this is not about narrative. So that actually is a mistake, but I don't think it was one made deliberately. A lot of the character tropes we see, a lot of the situations are put in are taken from action movies. I didn't say that can put off female gamers. I said it puts off gamers in general sometimes, but this is an interesting one. This was in response to a direct question. Where do you think the sexism in games comes from? I believe that was a question. It was something like that. It was a specific question. And I said, well, it actually comes from outside sources like action movies. My point was that games themselves are not sexist. They're borrowing from other forms of media. I'm not saying that sexism in game design my talk was not just this is bad for women. There were parts in my talk as well that talked about the fact that games sometimes promote the stereotype that men are more interested in violence than emotional or interpersonal situations. And again, somewhat deeper than a layperson may understand. And so I did say the things in the quotes. I did not say that can put off female gamers in that way. So this was, again, somebody trying to parse what I said and having the best of intentions, but not conveying the meaning I was actually going for. And hey, maybe I misspoke, but just that's an interesting one. And then this next thing, I actually checked with Vudge, my business advisor. He was great. We never met in person before, so that was really cool. But I actually asked him, was I challenging people? He says, no, that was absolutely not what you were doing. So this is interesting because the person who wrote this article, nice guy, said, so Kersner challenged game designers and developers at the conference to work to avoid those cliches in their games to make them more appealing to women. My actual challenge, the thing I said, what I want you to do is I want you to start thinking about gender in video games as a mechanic, as a system, and not as a narrative device or a series of images. I want you to think of it as a dynamic thing. That was the challenge. It was not work to avoid those cliches. Because one of the things I said in my talk is sometimes these cliches can work if they're dealt with deliberately. So again, And to me, it wasn't to make them more appealing to women. It's to make them more appealing to everybody. Most men do not like situations where women are constantly depicted as lesser any more than women do. This is not just something that women care about. And this is, this is a layperson engaging with gender studies. Yes, a journalist, but they are not an expert on gender. They are not somebody that understands gender theory. Again, this is why I don't do this talk on YouTube or in a totally open public forum. There has to be a basic level of understanding going in because it's a pretty deep dive. And then they get to other people, and I don't know. I don't know their experience, so I can't really speak. What I do know is no one knows what this image at the bottom is. At first, I thought it was Temple Run, but no, that's not it. I have no idea. But the quote on the bottom, too often female characters in video games act as the victim, the love interest, or the sexual conquest, according to Liana Kersner. I didn't actually say too often. Sometimes they do, yes. But I never said there was anything wrong with being a love interest. And what I said about a sexual conquest is that sexual conquest should not be a win condition. Basically, that if you're going to do a romantic storyline, make sure that it actually is about romance and not just about, hey, you got this person into bed, you get points. There has to be some sort of emotional payoff. Now, of course, there's dating sims, but those weren't the games I was covering. So again, I think just sort of a misunderstanding of what I was saying in the talk. I didn't say if it happened a lot, too often, not often enough. I wasn't directly asked. I don't remember that being a thing, because I think if I'd been specifically asked, I wouldn't have said, no, I don't think it's too often. It does happen, but you guys know my stump response. It happens. It doesn't happen any more than in films or television. And like I said, I have no idea what this image is, what this picture is. It's something. It's a female character, I assume, but it's very, very small. And then this statement at the end, this is actually true. That I hope by acknowledging the unintentional sexism that can happen in game design, game designers, especially men, will be more secure creating more well-rounded female characters. Yes, that's true. I want to take the fear out. So again, I'm happy that at least that got through, because this is a process, right? We shouldn't scream and yell at people who try to cover game conferences and these issues in gaming, because they are trying. And so I want to sort of praise as well as say, well, I think there was a misunderstanding there. And I can't say I was misquoted. I just think the framing of the quotes was not accurate, but I can't say I was misquoted. The quotes are accurate, because I did say, don't be afraid of pink in games for guys and those camo colors in games for girls. I did say that. And there we go at the bottom. Don't treat sex as a win condition. Make your female characters whole people. And don't put women on a pedestal to the point that you make that playable character unlockable, as opposed to having a male avatar and a female avatar right at the start. I did talk about the fact that game developers sometimes, in trying to make women, yay, women, better, they put these women up on a pedestal and end up coming across as quite sexist, because elevating women, making women seem better than men is still sexist. I did say that. I did cover that. So it's interesting to me that even though that's there, like even though they bothered to include that, and there's editors involved in this stuff as well, right? Like, I don't know what the initial piece the reporter himself included. Some stuff could have been cut down and changed into something very different. And that's why I wanted to talk about this and go through sort of what I think is accurate and what I think is inaccurate, because I don't think anything was twisted deliberately. The sense I get is that the CBC reporter that showed up on site cared enough. He came, he sat through the whole talk. He waited very patiently to interview me afterwards. He did his job. The fact that he didn't entirely understand what I was saying isn't his fault. And I'm not even going to say he must not be a gamer. He doesn't know games. He very well might play video games, which is why he went and did that shoot. But unless you're a designer or a game developer, unless you're somebody whose job it is to construct these things, I can't expect someone to be aware of the nuance of the situation. And that's why I'm just going to keep talking. I don't regret doing this media. I think overall I got, 2 or 3 important statements out that is a beginning to pivot the dialogue. And I'm very happy about that. Like, I don't want anybody to feel like I was mistreated. This is just the reality of interacting with the press, especially the mainstream press, who doesn't understand the nuance of gaming. So I don't want anybody to think I'm angry here. Again, I'm just using this as a teachable moment, for lack of a better term, or an awareness tool. Now, about the CBC radio thing, that's a little different. Radio to me has always been the most derivative form of media when it comes to doing news, because everything's done on the fly, very fast. You do not have time to get into anything really meaningfully. And so I got the call for the radio appearance about the same time as I was doing this. I got it right before my talk. Not right before, but a few hours before. And so I did my talk, and then we went to lunch. And I did a pre-interview with a producer from CBC Radio Ottawa. And she asked me a bunch of questions. And she sounded about as interested as I expected a radio producer to be in stuff, really nerdy stuff about games, in that she didn't seem interested at all. It was, And she could have been taking notes. I don't know. Might be why she sounded bored. But the sort of end of my talk, the hook, for lack of a better term, is I talk about how to make Grand Theft Auto, that whole killing hookers to take your money back after you use them to regain health mechanic. I talked about how to fix that and, not change the game meaningfully, not take the prostitutes out, and make the game more fun in one fell swoop, which is give them weapons, really big weapons, to the point that it's funny, and just make the player have to think twice whether the money is really that important. Because as it is, I think that the actual mechanics of the game make killing that prostitute more like smashing an ATM than murdering an actual person. And so that means that the people playing the games don't have murderous intent. They don't want to go out and kill women in the real world. But, from a mechanics perspective, it just makes sense to play the game that way. So what was the one thing the radio producer from the CBC honed in on? I wasn't aware of this, but she honed in on the prostitutes in Grand Theft Auto. So I go in there, and the thing about radio is because it's this ongoing grind, and they're on for multiple hours, and I was the last guest on the show. So you don't get to talk to them very much before you go on air. You talk to the producer, but you go in there, hey, how you doing? Alan was the guy's name. Nice to be here. Great. Talk a little bit. How's the conference? Yeah. Out of commercial. Here we go. And it starts with, here's a little clip of feminists playing GTA for the first time. And there was this tiny little scream that started in my head as I'm hearing this clip of, what have I gotten myself into? Because it just not only like, this is about, accidental sexism in games, not Grand Theft Auto. Grand Theft Auto is one game franchise in an industry of thousands. It drives gamers crazy that the entire industry is judged by this one franchise. And of course, then it also made feminists sound like ignorant, horrible destroyers of fun. And of course, there were a few nastygrams sent to me on Twitter after that of, have you even played the game? You're not a gamer. Sort of thing. It's like, I didn't pick that clip. That wasn't the clip my PR people sent with me. It was one they pulled to start off the segment. I have nothing to do with it, right? But I managed to turn it around and kind of go, whoa, ominous. But it was a really awkward start. I think it ended up well. Everybody's laughing by the end. It was itself a good segment, but it got off um, to a very ominous start. And I think some other people would not have been able to turn that around. And so I think some people would feel like that was a gotcha. I don't think that was their intent. Again, I don't think there's any ill intent here. Hanlon's razor applies. But it certainly was uncomfortable. And this is why I do what I do. I think there needs to be more dialogue between gaming professionals and the general public because they honestly don't know. This is their point of contact with the whole thing. And it's funny because after the segment, a guy came in to do traffic. But that was the whole thing. I was doing this whole talk, yay Ottawa game scene, yay Canadian game developers. I was so naive. I thought I was going to go in there and talk about the great Canadian scene and how women sort of work within that. The one thing I do like is one of the latter questions was, is it getting better? And I said, yes, absolutely. I was able to say that in my opinion, some franchises have massively improved in this regard from game to game. And they do care. And I got to say that developers are interested in feedback. They don't want people to be upset. They want to have fun. They want people to have fun with their products. So they're always listening. They're always trying to improve and they do care. So I got that out. So thankfully. But I wanted to tell that story so anybody who heard that can be aware that no, I did not pick that clip. And I am surprised that anybody thought I was at all involved in that element of that interview. Again, ignorance of how the media works. So this is why I'm talking about that.